I think South Dakota's in a really good spot. We have the strongest economy in the country right now. We're growing, so we have more revenue than we traditionally have. That means we need to make good decisions. And I'm encouraging the legislature through my budget to invest in our workforce, to invest in infrastructure, long-term projects, and then also public safety. Make sure that we're supporting Department of Corrections, but also our law enforcement officers and National Guard.
You know, something I thought was interesting during your address is that you brought up directly why we can't return the money. It seems like that's always it's a reasonable question.
Yeah.
Like, I can honestly understand if you're fiscally conservative why you might ask that question. Could you talk a little bit more about that decision and kind of the research that went into deciding it's silly to return this money?
I think it's an important conversation to have because some of these dollars that are coming from the federal government, we're being told how we have to spend them, so there's guidance from them on how we spend it. And if we don't take the dollars that are coming to the state of South Dakota from the bills we've seen pass in Washington, D.C., they'll just redistribute that to other states. The debt will still be incurred by the country. We'll still live with the rising inflation and the consequences of that debt, yet we won't have the opportunity to really set ourselves up for success and to insulate the rest of the people that live here from what those consequences are. So, you know, we certainly could reject some of these dollars, but then they would be given to other states such as California, New York, Michigan, and it would end up in our state hurting the people who live here.
You know, you talked about putting 14.2% aside in budget reserves, and you said exactly to prepare the state for what's coming next.
Yeah.
KEWL, obviously we have a pretty strong budget reserve, especially after last session. I know we put away even more money than we normally do. Can you kind of walk me through the decision to put even more into there and kind of what you mean by what possibly could be coming next?
Yeah. Traditionally, the governor proposes and the legislature will put 10% of the state's budget into reserves every year. Not required, but that's traditionally what happens in South Dakota. Last year we did 12%. This year I recommended over 14%. And that's because we have the revenue, and it's also recognizing what's happening outside of the borders of South Dakota. We do see some challenges ahead with the increased taxation that President Biden's talking about, increased regulation, the increased crunch on making sure there are penalties from federal government regulations that are coming, and then the inflation in costs and skyrocketing prices because of those policies. We're going to have to live in a very different environment in the next year or two. I want to prepare South Dakota for that and have more money in our reserves in case people out there having to tighten their belts aren't spending money, and that impacts our sales tax revenue as well.
You know, kind of to that, you talked a little bit about the inflation currently going on and some of the Biden spending policies. You know, you are also proposed that we give a 6% raise to healthcare workers, state employees, and teachers. That's, I think last year was 2.5.
Yep.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, and obviously the speech has happened, so I haven't had a chance to check. State statute says that it's either attached to inflation or 3%, whichever's lower.
Yes.
How do you navigate that?
Well, that's a state statute. It can be suspended or changed, and these folks here in the legislature are lawmakers, so they can do that. But that is what is in statute today. Today, I'm recommending a 6% increase. It's to look at really what the inflation is that we're dealing with and where it's at, and then setting us up to be competitive with the market too. We are losing those in healthcare and those in education to other states. We're not staying competitive with what the market offers outside of these jobs, and the same thing happens with state employees. These three areas have been incredibly challenged in the last 3 years. They've taken a ton more workload, a lot more pressure on their jobs, a lot longer hours, and to compensate them for some of what they're doing and the hours they're putting in, and to make sure we're staying relevant with other job offerings that they have, the 6% is necessary.
I saw a statistic or kind of a fun fact tidbit the other day that effectively due to inflation over the course of the last year, if you hadn't gotten like a 10% raise, you effectively lost money over the course of the last year because of inflation. What have you heard from state employees, and this is of course something teachers have talked about for a long time, trying to get their wages up. What have you heard that kind of made you say, okay, 6% is a good number, we really need to push this year?
Well, and I want everybody to remember, I don't get to dictate teachers' salaries. That's made at their local school district level. What I said today is that our state aid to education, I'm recommending a 6% increase. And then I'm asking those administrators and those school board officials to put all of that into their salaried staff, their teachers, those that are aides in the classroom, janitors, folks that work in these school districts. It could be a much higher percentage if they do that. The 6% increase that I'm talking about is directly the state aid to education formula. And the same thing can happen with state employees. For instance, I recommended that we put another $2.1 million into Department of Corrections staff. That's because someone who works in our Department of Corrections today can be a correctional officer in our penitentiary, but can leave that day and go get a job at a county sheriff's office for $2 more an hour. We're just not staying competitive, and that's why we have open positions. So those targeted investments into specific jobs that we need to have filled are incredibly important, that we do that to make sure we're taking care of people.
Yes. With the housing grant stuff, you have $200 million signed for that, $150 million. I wrote down $150 million. I can't remember what the difference.
Well, $150 million. It's a $200 million investment into a partnership with developers and local communities on housing grants. The $150 million is going to come out of state general funds. The other $50 million is federal funds that we'll use to partner with that. We can use that in federal dollars that are coming in. So that'll put together the $200 million that we need to really have the full $600 million investment once the communities and those local developers get on board.
How would distribution kind of ideally work with that $200 million? People aren't just moving to Sioux Falls, but they're of course moving to Rapid City or Lemon or Winter. How does it kind of break down in terms of distribution, and has that kind of been worked through?
Yeah, so we have a grant program that goes through our Office of Economic Development already that this is modeled after. It's called the Local Infrastructure Investment Program, and it is a structure where a community can apply for the grant. The state would match the numbers and the data that the community has, and then the developer would come in and do it. So it doesn't matter about the size of the community, and it doesn't matter who they are or where they are. If they apply and the dollars are there, then they certainly can qualify and participate in this program. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a $600 million investment into housing, which we just haven't seen in the state of South Dakota before.
A lot of what I see in this budget, I think, is quality of life improvements. I specifically look at the daycare and the 6%, but there are detractors, and many of them are in the legislature who might say, this is a lot of spending. This might not be the most fiscally conservative route. You are, of course, fairly, fiscally conservative. How do you balance fiscal conservatism versus, I just went through the daycare process.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare.
Yep.
How do you balance quality of life projects like that and fiscal conservatism?
Well, we're putting unprecedented amounts into our reserve funds, more than any other governor has before and more than the state ever has before. Beyond that, it's long-term investments that will save our people money and protect us from tax increases in the future. Because a lot of times discussions happen up here in a crisis mode when there's a lack of revenue and they need more revenue to fix a dam or to make sure that we're meeting the needs of South Dakotans. And so what we're doing is spending on projects that will benefit the state of South Dakota for the next 50, 60 years. And that ensures that we stay one of the lowest tax states in the country and that people do have a quality of life and they get to keep more dollars in their pocket far into the future.
I'll give you a freebie here, Governor. Why does South Dakota have the strongest economy in the nation?
I think the reason we have the strongest economy in the country right now is because we let people be free. We protected their freedoms, and that resonated with the country. So people came here and moved their families and businesses here, but we also let our businesses operate. Government crushed the economy in many of these states by what their leaders did. We kept ours open. We wanted to do business. We invited people to come here, and they did in overwhelming numbers. And that's why we see such high sales tax revenues in the state right now. That's why our tourism numbers have increased dramatically. That's why we've seen hunting and fishing licenses set new records. A lot of what's in this budget is unprecedented. It's a historic budget. It's also a historic time in South Dakota's history because we're doing better than we ever have before, which means we have to be responsible to prepare for the future.
I thought one of the other things that jumped out to me was the specific grants each university, specific insofar as cybersecurity at Dakota Wesleyan,
right,
and the YOLS program at USD, and specific improvements at Aberdeen or at Northern State University. Why is it important to get those done to help keep our universities competitive at a regional and national level?
Well, previously we saw a lot of our students leaving the state to get educated in the careers that they wanted and then not able to come home and get a career that they're in. And we have the capacity to be out in front of this. Cybersecurity is the next big industry training tool, but necessary skill to have in the country and worldwide. So for us to be able to make this kind of an investment in partnership with other dollars will make us, I believe, the world leader in training individuals in cybersecurity. Not only those students getting that education here, but where the students get trained is where the businesses come. So my hope is that this kind of investment shows we're serious about that industry, and the businesses that support security on the internet and in those defense programs will locate here as well.
Can you talk, obviously you talked about putting more money into promoting the state via tourism ads, television. I went to a Vikings preseason game a couple weeks ago and saw that we sponsored halftime deal or something like that. But can you just talk about the success that we had with that the first go around or within the last year?
Well, telling our story is powerful. Once people know what South Dakota's like, how successful their family can be and their business can be, is been shown to prove great rewards and benefits for the state. So marketing, we know works and has helped us, but now targeted marketing in specific areas that we want to continue to grow is important. So we're going to focus on agritourism, get a lot of people off the interstates, and they all know Mount Rushmore here. They know that the Badlands are here. We want them to understand what life is like on a family farm, what it's like on a ranch in South Dakota. And people want vacations like that these days. We also want to focus on our Native American communities and the history and the culture. So promoting them and marketing them and people that would love to travel to South Dakota and learn more is something that we should facilitate. Doing that and then using a portion of marketing dollars to focus on workforce needs too is a component that we just haven't fully grown that we're going to be focusing on with this $35 million that I've requested in the budget.